and welcome to Mindscapes, our series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions, philosophy, and activism describe contemporary India. My guest today is an activist monk of many causes. He is the chairperson of the United Nations Trust Fund for the abolition of contemporary slavery. He's campaigned against bonded labor, against child labor, issues of gender, the environment, and has been a champion of the cause of pluralism in India. I'm delighted to welcome Swami Agnivesh.
Namaste, Rajiv.
Swamiji, when you started your activist career, this was from being a student in an Anglican college in Calcutta, St. Xavier's.
I was teaching there.
Uh-huh.
I was teaching at St. Xavier's College. I taught for 5 years business management and law. Then I gave it up 1968.
And amongst your early formulations was the idea of Vedic socialism.
Yes.
What was Vedic socialism?
Vedic socialism, in fact, is a blending of a synthesis of Vedic spirituality, and socialism as we understand it. The idea was that we need to have a spirituality and not religion as we see it in our times, full of rituals, meaningless rituals, elaborate rituals. On the other hand, we also need to have a spirituality which can answer the questions which are being raised in society with regard to inequality, with regard to sort of exploitation of man by man.
Do you feel that socialism is now perhaps a defeated ideology globally?
I don't think so. What has failed really in Soviet Union was the statism. Socialism and spiritualism, they are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have a spiritual world order unless and until you have something what we understand by socialism. Because one of the golden principles of socialism is from each according to his capacity to each according to his needs. In a family, this works out very spontaneously. The youngest in the family gets the utmost attention, and the eldest who earns the bread takes his or her share the last. Now this is what the Vedas say, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The whole world should be ordered on the lines of those values which really are cherished
but
in a family.
In the context of the eve of the next millennium, a somewhat utopian notion? Do you feel that ideal in some way needs to be more pragmatically modified, adapted to work and to be relevant?
Well, these are ideas which are quite adaptable. There's nothing dogmatic about it, nothing rigid about it.
So in what ways in contemporary society would you like to see this, or do you see these potentially expressed?
Well, the potential lies in the very fact that the modern paradigm of development, industrialization, mechanization, automation, urbanization, etc., and coming together with that colonialism, colonization in search of markets, neo-colonization, they have developed certain contradictions within themselves. And the whole system is being considered to be highly, highly unsustainable. By people who know it, they realize it and they say that please stop.
In what ways?
In what ways means in terms of environmental crisis, in terms of human rights crisis. Most of the wars which are being fought today, they have got the basic, some such factors which are responsible for the lopsided nature of this economic growth and development. Some countries have arrogated to themselves to dictate to the rest of the world. For example, the G8, I would say. They are throwing up a model which will subserve their interest, but it will be to the detriment of the rest of the world.
So is this
the
impetus,
multinationals.
is this
Yeah.
impetus to for change going to have to wait for a crisis, for a catastrophe, or what kind of impetus?
The
can we
crisis
look
is
to?
already there, and people who know, they are already shouting from housetops, and they are saying, please, please, no further, no more.
So what are they saying? What is the sort of the paradigm that they are presenting as being practical, as being implementable?
The paradigm which is being suggested lies at the root of the crisis. That if you go on globalizing, if you go on having your sort of consumeristic model, pursuing these same values, then you are in for disaster. And therefore stop it. And go in for a model, a paradigm which is less consumeristic, where individual human beings are not condemned to consume, and people can live happily in friendship with nature, with the animal world, with the cosmos, and interdependence of everything in the universe should be realized.
I think that a few people would question or challenge that paradigm. I think the real challenges, and this is where people like you provide leadership and inspiration, is that how can that paradigm be internalized? How can that paradigm be universalized so that it moves out beyond the context of academic forums, seminars, debates, or even street processions? In what ways do you think this can substantially, tangibly be realized? Just through discourse?
I think majority of our people, the world over, they already understand the value of this paradigm, which I would like to call it simplistically a spiritual paradigm of development. And people like the tribal populations the world over, who live in friendship with the nature. People in our rural areas, villages, farmers, laborers, women, they all have been leading a simple life, but very rich, profound in terms of values. Now the whole thing is now being invaded by a small minority. The small minority is very powerful, and that is where the danger lies. If we can organize the majority of the world population, both in the north and in the south, and challenge the basic parameters of this modern day developments, refuse to consume, sort of a Gandhi's non-cooperation, I would say. I think this whole system will collapse. It has not much of inner strength. It needs to be challenged authentically. That's the problem.
What do you mean by an authentic challenge?
The lifestyle question. The lifestyle is very, very important. If the people in the north and in the south start consuming less, being more people friendly, nature friendly, animal friendly, etc., I think the present day market forces will not survive. Yeah, completely. Yeah. If we can have a Buddha or a Gandhi or a Tolstoy or somebody like role models, and if we can inculcate these values in the coming generations, I think it can work wonders.
What is the role of, you've mentioned sort of great leaders and writers, intellectuals. What is the role of leadership? Do you despair the vacuity of that kind of leadership in India?
Well, in the conventional dominant political leadership, there is definitely this type of a vacuity. It's very unfortunate. India, which was looked upon as a country which will provide leadership not only for the people of India but for the people world over, has failed miserably. But there is another area where I am looking for some sort of a leadership, and that is the field of religions. Religions unfortunately also got highly materialistic over last 50 years, and therefore if we can retrieve some of the lost ground and bring back religions on the original agenda of spirituality, which is so very common in all religions, which is so very at the core of all religions, and yet which has been overtaken by materialistic rituals and things like that, temples, mosques, churches, buildings, and so there I think there is a lot of potential.
You have a number of times drawn, in our conversation so far, drawn this distinction between religion and spirituality. What really is the distinction? Is religion merely ritualized spirituality, or what distinctions do you see?
I think the values which concern all of us, the whole of humanity, they constitute the core of spirituality. And the more I study the Vedas, the more I realize that the God, our Creator, God symbolizes these very values, like the value of love, truth, compassion, justice, etc. Now, what is God? If God is all these values, how best I can worship my God, my Creator? How can I relate to my Creator? The best way and the simplest way is to be more truthful, to be more just, to be more non-violent, compassionate and loving.
But many of these values are circumscribed by social circumstance.
Yes. That is where I talk about social spirituality. And I say, my making an effort to be more truthful will not achieve much of a purpose unless and until I also address the forces of untruth all around me. My being just within will not be enough unless and until I question the unjust structures all around, so on and so forth. So if I'm trying to be compassionate within and there is violence, subtle structural violence all around, I cannot be really non-violent within me. So it's an active spirituality, social spirituality, and that has been my mission. And I say that religion should come out of these ritual-ridden, superstitious mongering.
All religions are religions inspired by the Vedas?
No, I say that all religions are inspired by the Vedas, because Vedas they constitute the bedrock on which the rest of all religions grew. And some of them got distorted, perverted, many changes
But
took
isn't that
place.
a somewhat uncomfortable position, to say the least, to suggest to people from different religious traditions that, well, look, all religions derive from the Vedas?
Well, as long as they do not dispute that the Vedas are the ancient-most text of human knowledge, I think they will not find it very uncomfortable.
But does it really matter?
The quarrel is about the last word, the last prophet, or the last book. Nobody is quarreling about which is the ancient-most, the oldest one. And there I think we are in a comfortable position to suggest that, look, here are the Vedas which talk about human values. Here dharma is not Hindu dharma or Muslim dharma or Jain dharma or Christian dharma. It's simply Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara. In Vaisheshik philosophy, a school of thought, 6 schools of thought we have, out of which Vaisheshik, the originator of this school of thought was Kanad Rishi. He has defined dharma beautifully. He says, Yato abhyuday nishraya siddhi sa dharma. जिन कामों के करने से इहलोक और परलोक सुधरता है, whatever helps you in this life and life after this, and those activities, those things, they constitute dharma. So it's so very open-ended. You have to define. Every generation, every individual has to define, and there's total freedom for the soul. So that is the approach which needs to be inculcated or to be promoted.
But that is also
in Gita also, right up to Gita, Lord Krishna does not talk about Hindu dharma or any other dharma or even Vedic dharma. It simply says dharma, and dharma constitutes those principles or ideals or values for which there can be no dispute about, that these are eternal values, timeless values.
But isn't it enough for that to be your belief system, and for us to cultivate the ability to respect and work with traditions who don't share the belief or the faith that their scriptures and their traditions derive from the Vedas. Is there some sense of a need here for inclusiveness, for some aspect of pride that it really all started with the Vedas after all? Why is that so important? Or to even acknowledge that?
Well,
or to hold that forth if it makes minorities in the community
yeah, you are very right. I fully share your point of view, and it's not at all important that one's sort of subscription to the Vedas as they are written, texts, etc. That's not at all necessary. What is necessary is, and we are undertaking this exercise slowly and in a very subtle way, and it's having its little successes. For example, last year in Kumbh Mela, we brought around all religious leaders of the Hindu faith, and we said, let us stop fighting among each other on matters which are so trivial. Let us sit down across the table and find out the commonality. And very interestingly, on 1st, 2nd and 3rd of June last year, the 3-day exercise was undertaken at the Arya Samaj camp situated right in the heart of the whole Kumbh Mela. And Mahamandaleshwars and Shankaracharyas, together with our Swamis, they deliberated and they came out with such excellent propositions which were common to all our faiths or understandings, and yet they're very radical. For example, on the question of caste system, the Hindu religious leaders agreed that there can be no basis for birth-based caste system. Interestingly,
well, a section of the Hindu leaders that assembled for that meeting.
Then we came to Delhi, and in Delhi we had a series of such conferences, meetings, not conferences, just informal gatherings at some religious leader's house, like Maulanas or bishops or church sisters, nuns, etc. Everywhere we said, let us have an exercise, look for the commonality and not for differences. Keep the differences out. Let us find out those points on which we agree 100%. But the condition is, once we identify such points of commonality, let us decide that we shall work for it. It should mean some social change, contextualizing those points of commonality. So that's where we have struck a ground which is very little irritating, and which is really helping us to understand each other.
Why is it irritating?
It's not, I'm saying it's much less irritating. Nobody is finding it even slightly problematic.
Right.
Everybody says, okay, this is part of my own faith or belief system. So when we are talking about some of these issues concerning, say, the caste hierarchy and things like that, untouchability, people say, yes, it's something abominable and it should be done away with.
But
for example, the whole problem of liquor, alcoholism, all religious leaders, they have come together and they have endorsed in a massive big way. Last 6th of August, we had a massive big gathering of 5,000 to 7,000 delegates. Religious leaders came together on one platform, Talkatora Indoor Stadium. And they all said that we should work unitedly to make India free of alcoholism and drug menace. Nasha Mukta Bharat. That was the slogan they gave. Now, these are some of the areas where we can really strike a chord and say, let's come together, work together, and create more of communal harmony. And we have constituted ourselves under a broad platform. We call it Religions for Social Justice.
Why is it not possible for us to recognize, accept, acknowledge, applaud a difference and diversity instead of trying to find uniformity and gloss over what are essential differences? Because it's wonderful when religious leaders get together and they talk about this, and it's a very powerful, important, symbolic gesture. But finally, the community in everyday experience finds that communities are also different, and it's okay to be different.
Yeah. See, we should definitely celebrate the diversities, but the diversities are basically in terms of people's culture, their food habits, race, things like that. And such diversities should be not just respected but celebrated. There's no dispute about that, no problem with that. The only thing is when people fight in the name of religion. And if you go a little deeper, you will find that it's not religion which is at stake. Some trivial aspect, some ritual or something like that, which is a non-issue. If all our religious leaders could see India's poverty as problem number one, destitution, the helplessness of the majority of our poor people, the way our economic systems are getting hijacked, and how our values, we all have our stakes, religious leaders, people, they have stake in those values, and yet we are seeing that they are getting eroded every day. If we can come together and address those issues jointly, collectively, I think we can not only retrieve the lost ground, but create a new atmosphere altogether. The type of communal dissensions we had over past 10, 20 years in the name of Babri Mosque or this or that, they will definitely become things of the past, and we can create a new era as we march into the new millennium. We are looking forward where all religions, major world religions, and who have their presence in this beautiful country, they will come together in a decisive way, in the spirit of commonality, in the spirit of common spiritual heritage of the whole of mankind.
When does a sort of an ancient tradition or an ancient scripture, grounded and originating in a social environment, who decides that it's still valid, it's still relevant? It's a source of endless debate, sometimes confusion and conflict, interpreting and reinterpreting the same scripture, the same text. Isn't there a need for a moving away from the sanctity of the word, the Veda, or whatever it is? We are in a contemporary situation with a contemporary predicament. Do all our solutions, in practical terms, emanate from an ancient scripture or an ancient prophet?
It need not be, and it should not be. But if a certain thing does not exist in those scriptures, and then somebody is trying to interpolate or give a wrong interpretation to such a scripture, then that should be challenged in the first place. In the second place, with all our urge for rationalism and rationality, etc., scientificism, what would you call it? Scientificism,
yes.
Scientific attitude, etc. We should realize that there is great value attached to the scriptures. Scriptures which have been universally recognized to be some sort of a guiding principle for the whole of humankind.
But what if they conflict with common sense spirituality?
Perfectly all right. There's no problem. That's what I'm saying, that common sense spirituality and the Vedic ideals, they coexist so beautifully. That is where I say that let's go back to dharma, just pure dharma, and not Hindu dharma or Sikh dharma or Muslim dharma. Dharma is commonplace spirituality, common sense spirituality. And whatever is being considered as something militating against that common sense spirituality should be debated. There should be a dialogue around those points. And in the spirit of, again, going back to commonality with different religions, we should go back and again restate the position.
You've had a role as an applauded activist who has sort of been on the fringes of political processes and structures, and you have talked about the absence of leadership in the dominant political culture structure. Do you see ultimately, finally, a role for yourself? Is there escaping that role of participating and competing in the dominant political process and culture?
Well, I toyed with that idea, and way back in 1970, on the very day when I was initiated into sannyas, I floated a political party, which within 1 year was also became a recognized political party in 1970-71. And then I participated in the total revolution movement of Jayaprakash Narayan, which culminated into birth of Janata Party. I joined Janata Party, and then I was elected legislator of Haryana Assembly, became Minister for Education for a brief period. Then I got disillusioned, and more I got deeper into the dominant political structures, the leaderships, etc. I found that it is not enough. I'm not saying that good people should not, right type of people should not go into politics. More and more people should go, for right thinking people. But at the same time, you need another countervailing force. Gandhiji had hinted at the time of our independence, that there should be a Lok Shakti, a people's power, with moral power, moral authority to sustain them, to overlook and to act as a countervailing force on the powers that be.
So where do you see yourself, what do you see yourself doing 20 years from now?
Well, I have already started, and now I'm thinking that I should devote more wholeheartedly to building up this Lok Shakti, the power of the people. And that's where we are trying to bring together forces of religion, forces of, I would say, other people who all matter, opinion builders. Those who can, if they can come together and they can create another base, people's power base, I think then we can really challenge the powers that be. And not all the time in a spirit of confrontation, but in a spirit of critical collaboration with the political powers, we can create a new social order.
Swami Agnivesh, thank you very much.
Thank you.